Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and a big welcome to anyone who is new here. Thank you so much for joining us. I am really pleased that you're here. Today we're going to be doing a recent reads video. I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read and finished in October and November. So I haven't finished a ton of books in the past couple of months. Not because I haven't been reading, but just mainly because I have been reading big books. I've been dedicating a lot of time to Les Miserables, which you may know if you've been watching my videos is my new current obsession. I've also been reading a pretty chunky historical romance novel, which is one of my mum's favourite books of all time. So those two books have been taking up quite a lot of my reading time. They will probably feature in my December recent reads video. That being said, I have finished a few books over the past couple of months. I think around 6. We have some literary fiction, as always. We have a classic and some poetry. We have some non-fiction that I picked up for Non-Fiction November. We have some historical fiction that I really didn't like. We have a few books that I didn't really like, actually. So let's just get into the reviews. The first book that I finished in October was The Historians by Evan Boland. This is a new poetry collection that I was kindly sent a copy of by the publisher. Evan Boland was one of the best poets of the 20th century. She had an incredible, almost 60-year career, I believe. This is her final collection of poems that is being newly published by Carcanet Press. The collection weaves together history and myth and stories of ordinary women, mothers and poets and Irish suffragettes, bringing these women's stories to the forefront of history. So I thoroughly enjoyed this collection. I love the central idea here. The poems feel gorgeously intimate and personal, but at the same time they feel so overarching and truly historical. There's a real sense of honouring these women who have passed and remembering their roles and giving them their credit. The poetry has a lovely feel in this collection. It is very soft and lyrical with many different threads interweaving throughout. I loved the focus on the big and the small, the beauty and the pain, and overall the collection was just truly consumable and enjoyable and emotive. All of the things that great poetry should be, in my opinion. Of course, as with basically all poetry collections, there was the odd poem in here that I didn't love as much as others, some that I didn't quite feel such a strong connection to. But overall, I thought this was a really great collection. I am so pleased that I have been introduced to Evan Boland's work, and in the end, I gave The Historians 4 stars. Next up, in October, I read Far from the Madison Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This is a Victorian classic that I coincidentally read during Victober and just claimed it and ran with it. It follows the story of a young, spirited woman named Bathsheba who takes over her uncle's large estate and farm, and there she attracts the attention of 3 very different men. We have a devoted shepherd named Gabriel, a gentleman farmer named Boldwood, and a seductive soldier named Sergeant Troy. So this was my second ever Thomas Hardy novel. I read and adored Tess of the D'Urbervilles a couple of years ago, and I'm pleased to report I also really enjoyed this one. It's just a brilliant story. I loved learning about all of the characters in here, particularly Bathsheba and the 3 different men and all of their differences. I loved following the plot. We have passion and slow building romances and sexual tension. I was genuinely reading this like, who is she going to end up with? There is intrigue in here and peril as well. Decisions made have larger consequences. It is all quite dramatic, and all of this is set amongst the beautiful descriptions of small communities and rural life and wonderful landscapes. Hardy is definitely actually quite a wordy writer, but I didn't find it to be unnecessarily obtuse. There is also a good dose of social commentary in here, of course, exploring gender roles very prominently, as well as economical hierarchies and people's different roles within that. So yes, I found this to be a very enjoyable, very well-rounded Victorian novel. It isn't one of my absolute favourites. I didn't really connect with the characters so much in the same ways that I have in other Victorian novels, but overall I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read The Sin Eater by Megan Campisi. This is a dark historical novel that I picked up for Halloween. I was actually sent the proof copy from the publisher earlier this year. I was waiting for Halloween to pick it up, and it actually happened. Set in 16th century England, this novel follows the story of a teenage girl who becomes a sin eater. Someone who eats the sins of the dying in order to allow them to pass on to heaven. She then hears the sins of some people from the royal court and ends up getting swept into this world of treachery and betrayals and murder. So unfortunately, I did not like this book. I didn't think it was very good. And this was such a shame because I love the idea of this book so much. I basically love everything about it. Every autumn I become obsessed with dark, gritty historical novels. I want something plot driven. I want some intrigue. I want visceral, delicious descriptions. This book promised all of that, but it just wasn't very good. We started off well. I was feeling hopeful. The book opens with some action. It hits you right from the start, which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed getting to know the protagonist through both her current situation and also flashbacks to her childhood. I was very intrigued and I was excited to get going, but this book just didn't hold my attention, and in all honesty, I just don't think it was very well thought through. There was a good basic idea here, but I don't think there were really good enough ideas character-wise or plot-wise to turn this into a effective, convincing story. As an editor who reads submissions, I see this all of the time. The plot had nothing special to it, nothing surprised me. The characters weren't that interesting, and there was a lot of scope for the characters to be really interesting between the royal court setting and the older sin eater and the people of the village. The pacing also wasn't well done. It was far too slow at times and far too quick at others. The writing wasn't bad, I will say that. There were some quite nice moments, but it didn't really manage to sustain itself throughout. So this was unfortunately a disappointment to me. I mean, it wasn't terrible, it wasn't offensive, but it just wasn't great. It was very mediocre. I wanted something really delicious and exciting, and honestly, I just kind of wish somebody else had worked up this idea because it's a really good idea. So in the end, I gave The Sin Eater 2 stars. Next up in October, I picked up The Harpy by Megan Hunter. This is another novel that I picked up for Halloween and another one that I was kindly sent a proof copy of by the publisher. Described as being a dark, contemporary fairy tale, this short literary novel follows the story of Jake and Lucy, a married couple who have kids. When Lucy finds out that Jake has been having an affair, the couple come to an arrangement to even the score of their marriage. Lucy gets to hurt Jake 3 times. So this book wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, although I did quite enjoy it. As I mentioned, this book is described as being a fairy tale. It is said to be as otherworldly and magical as it is contemporary. Unfortunately, this led my expectations to be not quite on the mark. I thought this book was going to be far more fantastical and magical than it was. In actuality, this book is very firmly placed in the present day. It tells the story of a married couple who live a pretty standard, ordinary life, and when the wife finds out that the husband has been having an affair, she becomes understandably upset and angry and wants to hurt him back. We do have hints of otherworldliness throughout, so the story is broken up by mini chapters that focus on this creature of feminine revenge that Lucy has always dreamed about since she was a child and who she eventually sees herself embodying. But the book isn't actually magical or particularly fairy tale-y, and this is all fine. Like, it did what it was doing pretty well. Megan Hunter's prose is very nice. She is a pretty good writer. It was beautiful in places and very sharp in others. It did feel quite visceral throughout. Like, I definitely got the feeling of Lucy's pain and anger. It wasn't amazing. I don't think it was doing anything particularly special, but it was fine. But really, this just wasn't what I wanted from the book. My disappointment is far less to do with the fault of the book and far more to do with the fault of its marketing and my expectations. If a short literary novel about adultery and anguish and revenge is something that you're looking for, then she does paint an interesting picture here. Maybe you would enjoy it more than I did, but in the end, I gave this one a solid 3 stars. Next up, I picked up The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. This is a non-fiction book that I picked up in celebration of Non-Fiction November. Written by a historian, this book tells the story of 5 different women who were all killed by Jack the Ripper in the 1880s in London. So this book does what it says on the tin. It tells the story of these 5 different women, and instead of focusing on the person or people who killed them and the events of their murders, it more so focuses on the story of their lives in order to give these women back their dignity. Honestly, I thought I was going to love this one a little bit more than I did, purely because everyone seems to love this book. It is getting so much attention at the moment. Personally, I thought this was good. I found it to be enjoyable and informative. I really enjoyed the structuring here, the book being split into 5 different mini stories. I really like this kind of story-like narrative feel to non-fiction. It is my favorite way to consume non-fiction, and I do think this book was a good insight into London at the time. It built up a very clear, if grim, picture, but like I say, it didn't blow me away. I don't feel like I learned tons or that I was particularly invested in these women's lives, but it was good. It did the job, and if you are interested in learning about the lives of these women or just learning more about the lives of women generally in London at this time, then I would definitely recommend it. So in the end, I gave this one 3.5 stars. The final book that I'm going to be talking about today is Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. This is a literary fiction novel that came out a couple of months ago. I was very excited about it and received a copy of it on NetGalley to review. I mentioned this book in my most anticipated releases of 2020 video. I also mentioned it in my end of the year TBR. It primarily follows the friendship between 2 young men who live in Glasgow in the 1980s, and when they finish school, they go on a celebratory weekend to Manchester. Many years later, one of the men phones the other with news of his terminal illness and asks him for the biggest favour of all. So again, unfortunately, I was a tiny bit disappointed by this book. Man, I am being such a bummer in this video. I wanted to love this book. I wanted it to be perfect. I love character-focused literary fiction novels, especially when they are short and pack a punch with emotional, reflective, philosophical topics. I really thought this book was going to be a winner. And this book was really good in a lot of ways. It just wasn't perfect. I love the structuring of this book. It is split into two halves, with the first half taking place in the 1980s and the second half taking place in 2019. I loved the narrative style in here. It actually somewhat reminded me of the simplicity and perceptiveness of Tin Man by Sarah Winman, which is a huge compliment from me. I also really loved the central idea here and the central characters. Our protagonist here and his best friend Tully have such a precious friendship, and while I was reading throughout, I, on the whole, really did feel as though they knew one another and cared about one another. But unfortunately, this book just didn't quite hit the mark all of the time. As I say, the writing was good, and there were moments of brilliance in here, including the first line. This book has such a good first line, but it just didn't manage to sustain this brilliance all the way through. The characters as well, despite showing so much potential, just weren't there all of the time. I wanted more from them. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to see more. This book was so annoyingly close to being so brilliant in so many ways, but it just didn't quite manage it for me. And that just means that it didn't quite have the emotional impact on me that it really needed to have in the second half of the book. There were parts that were incredibly impressive and I was totally convinced, but throughout I just couldn't help but be kind of frustrated that it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be all the time. Even though it wasn't bad, it's kind of a weird one. So in the end, I gave Mayflies 3.5 stars. So there we have it. Those are all of the books that I read in October and November. If you've read any of these books, please let me know down below in the comments and chat to me about them. I love hearing your guys' opinions. Also, let me know if you hadn't heard of any of these books and they sound good to you and you want to give them a go. Thank you so much to everyone who has watched this video. I really appreciate it. I hope you're all doing well and that you're staying safe and that your families are staying safe. I really look forward to chatting to you all down below, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye.